Okay, in this tutorial, we are going to look at how we start using GitHub. So let's open up Internet Explorer and let's go to the GitHub website. Now, the first thing that you need to do is to create a Git repository. So let's call this my project. Let's give a description. Here you can choose if you want to make it public so that anyone on the internet can see this repository and others can collaborate with you, or you can choose to make it private. I'm going to make it private for the moment. Now you can initialize this repository with a README file where you can write a description of the project and what you're doing in this project. For the moment, we don't need to do this. Let's just create a repository from here. Okay, so we are on the next page. Here you will find some instructions on how we can work together with GitHub. So it tells us that how we can create a new repository on the command line using git init and then adding something and committing something to the repository. We could create a new branch. These things you already know about. Now what is new for you here are the git remote and the git push commands. Let's see how these two commands work. Let's go back to our master branch. Let's type in the command git remote. This is basically to check if you already are connected to an online repository, to a remote repository or not. Since you don't get any results, that means you are not connected to a remote repository. So how do we add a new repository, a remote repository? So that command is given to you here on the GitHub website. And we can just look at this one because we are going to push an existing repository that we created in the previous tutorials. So I'm just going to copy this. It gives you the exact path of your project. So you can just copy it exactly as it is and paste it on your command line. Okay, if I type in git remote now, it tells me there is a repository added with the name origin. So origin is just the reference that you will be using from now on for this URL. Okay. So origin is your local reference for this URL. You could have used anything else here. You could have used uh, remote branch or something like that. You could have used any other name in place of origin. That is not a git keyword. So you cannot use git remote there because remote is a git keyword. You could have used something else. So let's show you one more thing. If you type in git remote -v, you can also see what is the URL of the remote repository along with the local reference. Okay, let's go back to the GitHub page and see what it says. So it says that I need to create a new branch, main. Well, but there are several ways to do this. Since your default branch is master, some prefer to create a new branch, work on that, and push from that branch to your remote repository. For the moment, we are not going to go into all that. Let's keep it simple. We are on the branch master and we are going to push all the source code that we have from the master branch to the origin, which is this repository. So let's try to just run this command from the terminal. So what I'm basically saying here is that I want to push all the sources from the master branch to the origin, which is this remote URL. Let's run this. Okay, I pasted main by mistake, so let's change that again to master. Okay, here you have to authenticate because this is the first time that you are logging in into the GitHub repository from your terminal. I'm going to select web browser, and it opens up a page for me where I can put in my username password to complete my login. Since I was already logged into GitHub, it's simpler. I just have to click on authorize Git credential manager, and the connection is now authenticated. So I can just go back to my terminal, and I can see that the push is complete. Let's try to find out if we can now see the sources on the GitHub repository. Let's do a refresh. And there we have all the files that we changed. And you will notice something interesting here as well. You have the version number in which a certain file was added or changed. So for styles.css, there was no change since the first version. So you see that version number here. For modified.txt, it was added in the second version, if you remember. So you see that here. And for index.html, we had been changing in every version, including the final one. So you can see that here too. And you see the timestamp from before, based on which uh, you had changed each file. So these were changed like 2 hours ago, and index.html was changed more recently. So you see all that here as well. All this is coming from your uh, .git folder. So basically GitHub also uses the same Git to track the version of the files. And you can see here as well, the default branch on GitHub as well is master. So that's it. And if you want to make more changes here to your local, you can do that and keep uploading every time you do some changes to GitHub. So let's quickly try that out. So we are now in the master branch. Let's check its status once to see there is nothing to be committed. Okay, so index.html, there was a change to be committed in that. Let's commit it. It is to be added, in fact. Let's start using a normal version number since we have already put it to GitHub. Let us now go back to VS Code and do some change in modified.txt as well. Let's type in hello world and save it. Now let's commit that. I keep the same version number since it's the same version. Okay, there is nothing else to commit. And we can again type in git push origin master to push our changes to GitHub. I'm going to use the same authentication that we did before. Everything happens automatically this time, and the changes are now pushed. Let's go back and refresh GitHub. You can see that the files were recently modified. Now, there are several ways to use GitHub when you're collaborating with others on the same project. So say, for example, I create a new branch. Let's see first what branches we have right now. Okay, we still have those old branches that we had used. Let's delete them first. Okay, so both the branches are now deleted. Let's now create a new branch. Okay, so now I'm on the new branch. Let's clear the screen. Now say I make a lot of changes in the new branch, and at the same time there were others from my team who were making changes on GitHub from their local repositories. So sometimes I may not want to just upload what changes I made in new branch to GitHub directly. I may want to compare with what is there currently on GitHub. So in that case, I can pull from origin to master, which means uh, all the sources in my local master branch will be replaced from whatever is there on the remote repository. I have to authenticate again, just like I had to during the push. Okay. Okay, so here it says that the master is already up to date because I did not make any changes. Uh, but if there were any changes in GitHub, then all those sources would have been pulled and it would replace everything that you had on master. After that, you can locally try to merge new branch to your master branch, like we saw during the merge tutorial. When you do that, you can again see all the differences between the master and the new branch. If a fast forward merge was possible, if you have not changed the same lines that were changed by your team, then a fast forward merge could happen. And if the same lines have been changed, you may have some conflicts and those would have to be resolved. And finally, when you merge all your changes from the new branch into the master branch, you could just upload that on GitHub, and that would normally happen through a fast forward merge because you have already done the merging at your end in local. Now the other way is to push all your changes directly from new branch to using git push origin new branch. But in this case, the owner of the GitHub repository will have to check for any conflicts between the two and do the merge. So you can do it either way. Now in this tutorial, we are not going to cover how to resolve merge conflicts on GitHub. Maybe I'll do a separate tutorial for that later on. Uh, for now, there is one more thing I want to show you. So on GitHub, you have many repositories like this being created by many who are working on different projects. And sometimes you may want to uh, clone one of those repositories on your local system so that you can work on it and put your ideas on it. And then you can try to push that to GitHub. So how to clone a repository that is already there on GitHub created by someone else. Let's have a look at that. So we can search for some projects here, for example. Let's do a default blank search and see what comes up. So there's nothing. So let's put in, say, JavaScript. Oh, I should have searched in all GitHub. Yeah. So I see a number of JavaScript repositories. For example, there are so many different repositories in other languages, and there are so many different kinds of things on GitHub. There are wikis, there are marketplaces. So let's take a small one just to show you how the Git clone works. This seems to be really small. So let's go into this. Okay. So you have to go into code, and from here you can copy the link for this Git repository. Then you can go back to your terminal. Let's look at the name of this. It was pubnub. So let's go back to my root directory where I keep all my code. Here I create a new folder for this project. Let's call it the same. So I go into that, but I want to clone the Git repository from the remote link, and we can use the command git clone. So now it's cloning everything from that repository to my local folder. So now if I see, I have everything cloned into this JavaScript folder. So well, just one thing here. So pubnub basically is the name of the user who is the owner of this repository, who created the repository, and JavaScript is actually the name of the repository. Okay, so I can go into this to see all the files inside. You can also see that from the folder. So I can again open all these up in VS Code and do my changes on it. If I want, I can create a new branch, do my changes on that, and then I can push it back to the GitHub repository. Like this, you can work collaboratively with others on a project, or you can clone an online repository and you can work on open source projects on GitHub. So these are the basics that will help you get started with Git and GitHub. And maybe in future tutorials I'll try to show you the best practices and uh, how to uh, restore any of the previous versions uh, and delete the current versions that you have so that you can completely revert back to an old version. Those kind of things will be covered in future tutorials.